I'm offended by some things. I'm offended by chewing gum. I'm offended by backwards-pointing baseball hats. But I don't try to get a version of the blasphemy law passed to prevent people chewing gum or reversing their cap. So what if I'm offended? So what if my feelings are hurt? Does that give me the right to prevent others from expressing their opinions?
To the Honorable Navi Pillay, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, regarding freedoms and rights for non-religious and secular people worldwide. Dear Ms. Pillay, we the signers humbly ask you to consider both a human rights petition and concern shared by a growing number of people persecuted for non-belief in religious dogma, including millions of atheists, agnostics, and secularists around the world. Both the petition and the concern regard the enactment and enforcement of so-called blasphemy laws and their offshoots, such as defamation of religion and religious insult, hate speech legislation in member states. The reality is that these blasphemy laws and hate speech legislation violate the cornerstone rights of freedom of expression, thought, and conscience, tenuously upheld by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Articles 18 and 19 in particular.
An Indonesian man is waiting to hear if he'll face a jail term for professing his atheism online. West Sumatran civil servant Alexander An was arrested earlier this year for posting on Facebook, quote, "There is no God." Prosecutors in the case have demanded a prison sentence of 3.5 years, and the verdict is expected later on Thursday. Let's get more on this and bring in Andy Bayuni. He's the chief editor from the Jakarta Post. Your newspaper has been covering the story. What do you expect us to hear from that verdict?
Well, I think it's going to be a guilty verdict. We just don't know how many years he will get. And the question is whether the people who had protested for his, against him would also be satisfied with 3.5 years of jail. There have been pressures on the court to give him even a stronger punishment because they're angry at the fact that he was able to declare his atheism and actually use the Facebook to pronounce that God doesn't exist.
Right,
and he was actually engaging with other people in the Facebook.
And seeing that he declared his atheism, he was charged with blasphemy, however. Can you explain that?
Yes, it's not so much that he professed the atheism, but he was engaging in a debate, in an intellectual debate in the Facebook with other people, and then where he challenged those people, those Muslims, to prove that Islam does exist, that God does exist. And this was used in court against him under the blasphemy law that he was insulting a major religion in Indonesia. And that's the way the law is in Indonesia.
The issue of free expression is clearly hugely important, and it's most important for people who live under Sharia law, Islamic laws in the Middle East, North Africa, and Asia. There are countless examples of this. The Kuwaiti parliament has just recently voted in favor of a legal amendment to make blasphemy punishable by death after the arrest of a young man who tweeted on Muhammad, and it was deemed to be blasphemous. You must know of this case of a 23-year-old Hamza Kashgari in Saudi Arabia who faces the death penalty potentially for blasphemy, for tweeting an imaginary conversation with Muhammad, and also saying that women in Saudi Arabia cannot possibly go to hell because they already live in it. In April, 2 young Tunisians, and very often these are young people, 2 young Tunisians, one in absentia, was given a 7-year prison sentence for posting cartoons of Muhammad on Facebook.
Advocates of blasphemy legislation and its offshoots argue that these laws protect the harmony of pluralistic societies. However, as demonstrated by a number of conclusive studies, the enforcement of blasphemy laws actually deepens divisions among religious and secularist groups, creating unnecessary civil unrest.
Sectarian violence has continued in Pakistan, where crowds ransacked and torched a Christian neighborhood in the eastern city of Lahore. The unrest erupted Friday night after a Christian man was accused of committing blasphemy, a crime punishable by death in the country. Police took the man into custody in an attempt to pacify the mob. Hundreds of Christian families fled the area overnight, fearing for their safety.
In practice, blasphemy laws are used to infringe upon basic human rights, often utilized in a discriminatory and dictatorial manner, as they bestow upon inhumane leaders the legal means by which these rulers can persecute both religious minorities and non-religious groups alike. Such legislation frequently leads to arbitrary arrest, detention, poor treatment in custody, including torture and death, dubious legal procedures, and poor application of justice. Additionally, the definition of an alleged blasphemy offense often lies in the hands of police and judicial authorities, again wielded arbitrarily and dictatorially.
Religious extremists also use blasphemy laws to discriminate against religious minorities, and this brings me to the third part of the presentation. Experts have described blasphemy laws in some countries as being a form of legalized discrimination. Persons targeted include members of the majority religious group who are seen to be questioning religious doctrine or failing to adhere to the state-sanctioned interpretations of religious doctrine. They include members of minority groups such as Christians, or of sects considered deviant or heretical by governments in power. The breakdown of persons charged with blasphemy in Pakistan highlights the discriminatory nature of these laws. Ahmadiyya and Christians make up less than 2% of Pakistan's population, yet almost 50% of the more than 900 prosecutions for blasphemy in the past 2 decades have been against Christians and Ahmadiyya.
Abuses of blasphemy legislation include the following. Governments have used blasphemy laws to silence political opponents. Religious authorities employ blasphemy legislation to impose doctrinal orthodoxy on members of religious groups, often with the sanction of the state. Religious extremists utilize blasphemy laws to attack other sects, critics, and non-believers, frequently fatally. Unscrupulous individuals have fabricated blasphemy charges against others in local communal disputes. Vigilante mobs have committed violence against innocent and or defenseless individuals accused of blasphemy, whether or not truthfully.
Dadu, southern Pakistan, just a few months ago. A man is caught burning papers to keep warm. Someone says they include pages of the Quran, an act of blasphemy. It's unproved, and police say he may have mental health problems. But an angry mob gathers and stone the man to death. Then burn the body. Police arrest some of the killers, but a local religious leader defends the violence. In Pakistan, blasphemy is a crime which can be punishable by death or life in prison. But we've discovered that many of the people accused of blasphemy are in fact later found to be innocent. And instead of changing or repealing the law, it's being increasingly used in a climate of growing extremism.
Moreover, blasphemy and religious insult legislation often is discriminatory based on social class and status, since it creates provisions whereby a skilled and educated defendant stands far less chance of prosecution than a less educated and privileged individual. Even in relatively democratic regions, blasphemy and religious insult hate speech laws have a universal chilling effect upon normal freedom of expression, including and especially free speech and the right to dissent. Blasphemy legislation is a species of libel with no real rules of evidence or proof. Blasphemy laws are either exclusive, favoring one religion over others, or else try to be inclusive, in which case they may be inadequate for protecting religious beliefs in conflict with one another. Moreover, the legal criteria for recognition as an authorized or accepted religious group, where laws do not protect a specific established religion, can be problematic and often are defined poorly.
Elizabeth Sabodich-Wolf, welcome to you.
Thanks very much for having me on your show, Michael.
Well, it's a pleasure. Now, for the uninitiated, for those who may have forgotten or don't know the story, what happened to you in Austria?
In Austria, I was prosecuted for speaking my mind about the marriage of Muhammad to his child bride Aisha, and the Austrian authorities didn't appreciate what I said and charged me first with hate speech and then later changed the charges to denigration of religious teachings of a legally recognized religion in Austria. I was then found guilty on the second charge and fined 480 euros. The case is currently pending at the European Court for Human Rights.
Now, from what I read of what you said, you merely reiterated what is described as being what happened in the life of Muhammad. You barely even commented on it.
It's known to happen all over the world. A religious statue appears to cry. Devout Catholics flock to it, believing it to be a miracle. From weeping Mary statues in California to a tearful Jesus in Israel. Usually it's just a matter of personal faith. But now one man in Mumbai is facing jail time for debunking what was thought to be a similar miracle. In March, water began dripping down a statue of Jesus on the cross at Our Lady of Velankani in Mumbai. Parishioners collected the so-called holy water. Others drank it, hoping it would cure ailments. But rationalist and atheist Sanal Edamaruku investigated and said it was actually sewage water percolating through the statue because of a leaky water pipe.
The priest stopped to pray for a while for this water to be distributed. And he has been giving this water, the assistant priest has been distributing this water and brought to me also. People were given in a spoonful on their palm and they were just licking it without knowing what it was.
Now he's being charged with blasphemy under Section 295A of the Indian Penal Code, which accuses him of, quote, deliberately hurting religious feelings and attempting malicious acts intended to outrage the religious sentiments.
To oppose arbitrary and barbaric blasphemy legislation, our organization, Human Rights for Atheists, Agnostics, and Secularists, has created a petition appealing to the United Nations to amend Articles 1.3, 13.1b, 55c, and 76c of the Charter of the United Nations and the Statute of the International Court of Justice to include the non-religious and secular as an expressly protected group. In so amending, the United Nations would be sending a clear message to its member states that imprisoning, torturing, executing, and otherwise molesting secularists and non-believers, such as atheists and agnostics, is incompatible with basic human rights. As it presently stands, there are 13 countries around the world that can execute secularists and non-believers, along with many others that prescribe imprisonment and or issue fines to those who do not share the majority religious view of the state, or who are accused of religious insult or hate speech. The primary aim of this limb of our petition, which has the support of Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Ricky Gervais, Roseanne Barr, and other secular, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, and Hindu signatories, is to bind member states that have refused to sign the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Our petition also aims to implore the United Nations to amend the ICCPR by narrowing and tempering the restrictions on freedom of expression enunciated in Articles 18.3 and 19.3 A and B, as well as Article 20.2. In this regard, our petition is in line with the proclamation made in 2011 by the United Nations Human Rights Committee, which declared that prohibitions of display of lack of respect for a religion or other belief system, including blasphemy laws, are incompatible with the ICCPR. We thank you for your time and hope that you give this matter the attention it deserves on behalf of millions of human beings globally. Sincerely, Michael Sherlock, founder and co-chairperson, Human Rights for Atheists, Agnostics, and Secularists. D.M. Murdoch, co-chairperson, Human Rights for Atheists, Agnostics, and Secularists. And Michael Nugent, chairperson of Atheist Ireland.